little fox.
Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Episode 9, The Comb.
Remember, Snow White,
Dar said.
don't let anyone in.
I won't.
Snow White said. Snow White swept. Then she sat down with a book. Knock, knock. Snow White jumped up.
Who is it?
Snow White asked.
Just an old woman.
The person said. Snow White peeked outside. She saw a woman with a long nose. Snow White thought.
She's not the woman from yesterday.
Please buy a comb.
The woman said.
I need money for food.
Oh, you're hungry?
Snow White felt sad.
Come in.
She said. The woman handed a comb to Snow White.
It's lovely.
Snow White said. Snow White ran the comb through her hair.
Ah!
She fell to the floor. The woman laughed.
Goodbye, Snow White.
The dwarfs arrived home. Snow White lay on the floor very still.
Oh no!
Dar cried. The dwarfs tried to wake her up.
Is she dead?
Mar asked. Star wiped a tear from his eye.
What's this?
Par asked. He pulled a comb from Snow White's hair. The princess woke up.
That comb must be poisoned.
Dar said. Zar made a fist.
The queen did this.
Yar made a fist.
She's the worst.
At the castle, a servant passed the queen's room. From inside, he heard a terrible shout. Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Episode 10, The Apple. The queen stomped her foot. She threw her hairbrush and screamed. Duh! I hate Snow White! The queen took a deep breath. I need a plan. She paced back and forth across the room. Then she stopped. I know! I will create a poison apple. Snow White sat by her window.
Apples for sale.
A woman shouted.
Wonderful, delicious apples.
That must be the queen again.
Snow White thought.
Hello, dear.
The woman approached Snow White.
Do you want to buy an apple?
Snow White frowned.
No, thank you.
She said.
Are you sure?
The woman held up an apple.
This one looks delicious.
She held the apple closer to Snow White. Snow White's eyes went wide.
What a beautiful apple.
She thought. It was bright red. Light seemed to sparkle around it.
I must not trust this woman.
Snow White thought. But the apple looked so delicious. The woman smiled.
Try it, dear.
Snow White gazed at the apple.
Just one bite.
She murmured. Snow White's teeth sank deep into the apple. Everything went dark. Mirror, the queen snapped. Who is the most beautiful woman in the land?
My lady,
The mirror sounded sad.
you are.
Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Episode 11, The Glass Coffin. That night, the dwarfs arrived home late. Once again, the house was dark. Snow White lay on the floor without moving.
Oh no!
Dar cried. The dwarfs shook Snow White. They shouted her name. But she didn't wake up. Dar gulped.
Snow White is dead.
When the sun rose, the seven dwarfs were still crying. The dwarfs built a glass coffin. They made a bed of flowers inside. Gently, they laid Snow White in the coffin. They set the coffin outside among the trees. The sun shined down on her. Inside her coffin, Snow White was still beautiful.
It's strange.
Zar said.
She doesn't look quite dead.
Yar nodded.
It looks like she's sleeping.
Star wiped a tear from his eye. Animals gathered around the coffin. Everyone in the forest was very sad. Birds sang sweet songs. One day, a prince was traveling through the forest. He hummed softly as he rode along. The prince passed a small house. He saw a dwarf resting on a glass coffin.
How odd.
The prince got down from his horse. He walked toward the dwarf.
Hello!
The prince called. The dwarf woke with a start. He banged into the coffin, and it fell to the ground. Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Episode 12, A Wedding. The prince rushed towards Star.
Are you okay?
Yes,
Star said.
but
Someone gasped.
Snow White, she's breathing!
Star shouted. The prince looked down. Inside the coffin was a beautiful girl. The prince threw open the coffin's lid. He helped Snow White to her feet.
Thank you, sir.
Snow White said. The prince couldn't stop staring at her. The other dwarfs rushed over.
Hooray!
Dar cried. Gar picked up a piece of apple.
Be careful!
Snow White cried.
That apple is poisoned. It was stuck in my throat. Something knocked it out.
Star blushed.
I knocked the coffin over. It was an accident.
Snow White hugged him.
You saved my life, Star.
The prince was already in love with the young woman.
What happened to you?
He asked. Snow White told him about the queen. The prince dropped to one knee.
That evil woman cannot hurt you now.
He said.
Please, marry me.
The whole kingdom was invited to the wedding. When the queen arrived, she looked around. "Who is the bride?" she said. Then she saw her. "No, not Snow White!" The queen stomped out of the wedding. Soon, she moved to a faraway kingdom. But Snow White and the prince stayed right there and lived happily ever after.